On a typical fall day, I'm enjoying my coffee and taking in the stunning colors of the season. My life changed forever. I'm Mateus Ferreira. I'm 45. I live in Burlington, Vermont, in the United States. Near-death experience. It's important to know who I was before this event. I lived in a 2-story house near Lake Champlain. I was a graphic designer at a local advertising agency. I was openly gay and in a relationship with my partner, Marcos, for 3 years. My life was quiet and without turbulence. That morning started like any other. I was on my way to work in my Subaru AEC, savoring my caramel macchiato, when something unexpected happened. Out of nowhere, a 680-kilogram moose appeared in front of me on Route 7. Accidents with moose are not uncommon, but I was not prepared for that moment. I swerved, but at 105 kilometers per hour, my car lost control. The last thing I remember was my coffee cup flying through the air as the car rolled to the bottom of a ravine. The collision hit several trees before coming to a stop. I was trapped between the steering wheel and the car seat. I was seriously injured. After the accident, a passing truck driver saw the rear lights of my car through the trees and called the emergency services. The rescue team had difficulty reaching me due to the steep terrain, and it took more than an hour to get me out of the wreckage. At that point, I had already lost a lot of blood due to multiple injuries, 4 broken ribs, 1 lung punctured, internal bleeding, and severe. I remember fragments of the rescue operation. I heard the sound of metal being cut down, command shouts, and the sound of helicopter blades. I was airlifted to the University Medical Center in Burlington, where the doctors informed me I had died twice during the flight, once for 3 minutes and once for 4. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to see other powerful testimonies like this. Share it with someone you know needs to hear this message. Together, we can spread truth and hope. Remember, seeking the truth can change your life forever. While Marcos was at work and received the news of the accident, he ran to the hospital. When he arrived, I was already in surgery. There was only a 20% chance of survival. I underwent several surgeries to stop the internal bleeding and repair the damage to my vital organs. The damage to my vital organs was significant. However, what happened during the minutes when my heart stopped changed everything. My experience was so vivid and so real that it completely transformed my understanding of life, death, and everything I thought I knew about existence. It wasn't like those peaceful, light-filled experiences we normally hear in near-death stories. I had a 20% chance of survival. I underwent several surgeries to stop the internal bleeding and repair the damage to my vital organs. What happened when my heart stopped was a complete game changer. It was a completely different experience. It haunts me to this day. I was comfortable with who I was. I had a good life with a loving partner and a successful career. I never questioned my lifestyle or my beliefs. I was raised in a Catholic family, but it had been a long time since I'd been to church. I was confident and in control of my life. I was a happy person with a loving partner and a successful career. I never questioned my lifestyle or my beliefs. I was raised in a Catholic family, but it had been a long time since I'd been to church. Religion was no longer part of my life, and I didn't think I needed it. I believed that if there was a God, He would accept me as I was. But those minutes when I was clinically dead showed me how wrong I was. What I saw in those minutes between life and death changed not only my beliefs but my whole way of life when my heart stopped. My life changed in an instant. It was like falling asleep or fainting. I saw myself separating from my body and floating above the helicopter. I saw the paramedics working on my body. I felt disconnected from my body, as if I was watching a movie about someone else. Then, the tunnel came. It wasn't the warm, welcoming light people often describe, it was a swirling vortex pulling me with unbelievable force. The force was unbelievable. It was as if I were being sucked up by a vacuum cleaner at an impossible speed. Colors I had never seen before began to form around me, and a deep, resonant sound seemed to vibrate in my body. As I progressed through the tunnel, I felt an overwhelming sensation that my whole life was being exposed before me. It wasn't just memories passing by, it was as if I was living each moment at the same time. I felt the weight and consequences of every act, every lie I told, every person I hurt, every selfish decision I made. The most crushing revelation was about my relationships. I saw Marcos, but I didn't see him as I always saw him, with that loving look. Instead, I saw that our relationship was actually causing spiritual harm to both of us. Every intimate moment we shared appeared as dark stains on our souls, like drops of crystal clear water. I saw my childhood, when I began to feel different from the other children. I remembered the confusion. I had always understood our relationship to be a love story, but I saw that it was actually causing spiritual harm to both of us. Every intimate moment we shared appeared as dark stains on our souls, like drops of crystal clear water. I saw my childhood when I began to feel different from the other children. I remembered the confusion, fear, and eventually, rebellion against traditional values, but now, with this new perspective, I could see how every step I took away from my religion led me further and further away from the truth. The tunnel experience seemed to last for hours, even though it probably was only a second in terms of real time. Suddenly, everything stopped. I found myself in a vast space that defied all description. It was neither dark nor light, it simply existed, and I was not alone. A presence approached. It wasn't a physical form, but I immediately recognized Jesus Christ. It was an absolute recognition, as if I had suddenly remembered something I had always known but had forgotten. His presence was overwhelming, a mixture of pure love and authority that made me want to fall to my knees. This was not the gentle Jesus of the school pictures, he was the King of Kings, the Judge of all creation. At this moment, all the justifications I had given for my lifestyle collapsed. I couldn't hide anything from him or from myself. I couldn't hide anything from him or myself. His message was clear, his love for me was intense, but he didn't accept all my choices. I saw my lifestyle as natural and good, but it was actually in opposition to his plan. The message was unambiguous, my sexual orientation wasn't the problem, but acting on it, embracing it, and making it my identity. At that moment, I didn't know how to react. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and full of regret. The vision of my life before me was like a mirror, reflecting the naked truth. I understood exactly how far I had strayed from divine principles. My own desires had become more important than what God had planned for me. At the same time, I felt an indescribable compassion coming from Jesus. It was as if he knew how lost I was and wanted to show me the way back. There was no anger in his eyes, only sadness at the path I had chosen. Jesus then began to show me something I had never imagined. He revealed to me how people's choices influence their souls in a way beyond what can be seen in the physical world. In the physical world, I saw images of people who had made similar choices to mine. I saw the pain that these decisions caused, not only for them, but for everyone around them. Their faces showed something deeper that affected their hearts and minds. Their minds showed me that the suffering was a reflection of the eternal consequences of life's choices. But at the same time, Jesus also showed me something unexpected. I saw people who had turned away from the life I was leading. They had chosen change and decided to follow the path that Jesus proposed. I saw how these people had found a peace that was not based on external circumstances but on something much deeper, the truth of God's love. These people who had lost were now experiencing a kind of freedom and happiness that transcended everything I knew. I witnessed people who had rejected the life I was leading and chosen a different path, following the path that Jesus proposed. I saw that these people had faced difficulties along the way, but they had found a peace that was not based on external circumstances. It was based on something much deeper, the truth of God's love. These people who had lost everything were now experiencing a kind of freedom and happiness that transcended everything I knew. The most impressive thing was when Jesus revealed to me that true freedom does not come from living according to our desires, but from living according to divine purpose. I saw clearly that my sexual orientation and the desires I had embraced as part of my identity were not something I need to carry forever. Jesus showed me that He offered the strength and healing needed to resist these temptations, even if they didn't disappear completely. While I still lived on earth, the vision of people who had fought against their own desires and found victory touched my mind deeply. They were now filled with a peace they had never experienced before, and this peace was the result of their decision to follow the path of Christ, even when it meant facing enormous difficulties and the prejudice of everyone around them. Jesus told me that the truth is not easy to understand. The world we live in is full of lies, lies that seem attractive and justifiable. But in the end, these lies, these illusions distract us from God's plan. The world's conception of freedom is a form of bondage. True freedom, Jesus explained, is living according to God's purpose for our lives, uninfluenced by external pressures. He showed me that true happiness lies not in the relationship with Marcos, but in my reconciliation with God and the divine plan for my life. I know now that what God has planned for us is better than what the world calls freedom. True freedom is a form of slavery. Jesus explained to me that true freedom is the ability to live according to God's purpose for our lives, regardless of pressures. He showed me that my happiness would not be found in the relationship I had with Marcos, but in my reconciliation with God and in the divine plan for my life. This revelation left me with a huge weight on my shoulders, but at the same time, I realized that there was a vision of a future in which I would live according to God's truth. Jesus showed me that true love wasn't about supporting and affirming choices that were far from His will, but about helping people find the way, even if that path was difficult and unpopular. I understood that true compassion came from guiding people towards God's love, not simply accepting what they choose without question. Then, as a confirmation of everything I was experiencing, Jesus led me to a vision of the future. I saw two paths. In one, I continued the lifestyle I had chosen, but ended up with a tragic end without repentance and without the salvation that God offered me. In the other, I embraced the truth. I knew that true compassion came from guiding people towards God's love, not simply accepting what they chose without question. Then, as a confirmation of everything I was experiencing, Jesus led me to a vision of the future. I saw two paths. One led to a tragic end without repentance or the salvation that God offered me, and the other led to an eternal reward. I knew that I had to leave behind the lies I had believed and dedicate myself to living according to God's principles. The contrast between these two paths was clear and irreversible. In one, I saw the destruction of my soul. In the other, I saw the eternal reward that awaited me. At the end of the second path, I saw the coronation of those who had chosen God's way. I knew that choosing God's way would be difficult, but it was the right choice. I would lose friends, face severe criticism, and even my relationship would be at risk. But at the same time, I knew that if I stayed in that eternal state of separation from God, the consequences would be unthinkable. The weight of responsibility for my decision was overwhelming. The future of salvation and the possibility of helping others to find the path God's way was on my shoulders. The choice was clear. Jesus offered me a final choice: return to earth and share my lessons with others or face eternal consequences. I saw how my story could impact many lives, helping others avoid paths away from God. My mission would be difficult but purposeful. I could help others with the same struggles, people who felt the same pains, doubts, and questions that I had when I made the decision to return. I felt a peace that surpassed all the fear and insecurity that had previously dominated me. It was as if a great burden had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time, I felt a purpose. I knew that despite the difficulties I would face sharing my experience with the world, there was a much greater mission at stake, and that God would give me the strength to fulfill that purpose. When I returned to my body, I felt intense physical pain, but it was nothing compared to the pain before. I was in the hospital, lying on the bed with Marcos by my side. He was holding my hand, and I was still not understanding what had happened. I believed that the trauma to my head had altered my perception of reality. Explaining everything I had experienced was one of the most difficult tasks of my life. I knew that he wouldn't understand, and words would be insufficient to convey the depth of the experience I had lived through. Marcos, with whom I had shared so much of my life, was skeptical. He believed that the experience had been an effect of the trauma, a vision caused by the state I was in. I couldn't blame him for doubting because the transformation I underwent went against everything he had believed up to that point. My words seemed like a direct attack on our relationship and the life we had built together, and it was painful. But the truth I had received was much stronger than any other bond I had. In the first few days, I was flooded with a mixture of emotions, and I knew that the change I was facing would not be easy. Every thought, I was met with doubt because my transformation went against everything he had believed. My words felt like a direct attack on our relationship and the life we built together. It was painful, but the truth I received was stronger than any bond. The first few days were a flood of emotions. I knew the change would be difficult. Every thought, impulse, and desire were questioned. But I felt an inner strength I hadn't known before. It came from reconciliation with God. I knew I was on the right path when I finally shared my experience with the church. I found a support group that accepted me without judgment. They understood my spiritual struggle. The counselors understood my sexual struggles from a Christ-centered perspective and were there to support me on my journey of transformation. It wasn't easy, and temptations still arose. Old habits died hard, but I was set on following God's path for me. I found strength in this new environment to face the attacks that soon began to come from all directions. My social networks were flooded with hostile messages. I was called a traitor, a hypocrite, and even a homophobe. Homophobic friends, who I considered close, abandoned me, and many in the movement began to attack me fiercely. The movement began to attack me fiercely. Storm, there was something that gave me strength. I knew that I was being faithful to what God had shown me. Attacks were painful, but I realized that my decision to live according to God's truth was not only affecting my life but could help other people. Time passed, and I saw that many were going through the same struggles but were afraid to speak out, afraid of being afraid to change their lives. I knew that what I was facing, the process I was going through, could be the key to opening the eyes of others. So I began to open up more, share my story. As time went by, a support group was formed. It was made up of people who, like me, were seeking to live according to God's will, people who wanted to leave the LGBTQ lifestyle behind them. It wasn't about forced conversion or pressure. It was a space of love, compassion, and support where everyone could share their struggles without fear of judgment. The mission was clear: to help people understand that they could live God's plan for them and that God was willing to give them the strength necessary for this change. Years later, I see the impact of that decision in my life and in the lives of others. The peace I feel now comes from following God's plan, not from conforming to the world's expectations. I am confident that my struggles and temptations will always be a part of my life, but the freedom I have found in living according to God's truth is indescribable. I am certain that there is nothing more precious than knowing that I am living according to God's purpose. Every day, I receive messages from people who have found the strength to take the first step towards change because of my story. Others are still struggling with their decisions, but they now know that they are not alone. I am no one special, but my story has served to inspire those who seek truth and freedom in Christ. Change the past, but I can. God's grace has helped others find the same path of salvation and liberation that I have found. I know true freedom is not in doing what we want, but in living according to God's purpose for us. The truth may be difficult, but it is the only way to true peace and salvation. I may have lost my old life, but I have gained something much more precious, the ability to live in truth, knowing that I am fulfilling God's plan. If you have been touched by this story and believe that it can help more people, like and share this video. Your interaction is key to spreading this message of transformation and hope. Subscribe to the channel and activate the Tinkerbell to receive updates. We are in this together.